What's a great approach from a security vendor? Go.
My tactic and advice that I would give to sales teams is to make their customer champions of success within their organizations. If they're able to do that, you win a customer and a relationship for life.
It's time to begin the CISO Series podcast.
Welcome to the CISO Series podcast. My name is David Spark. I am the producer of the CISO Series, and joining me as my co-host, it's none other than the operating partner of Wild Ventures, Andy Ellis. Andy, say hello to the audience.
Good morning, folks, or depending on when you're listening, good afternoon, good evening, or good night.
Our sponsor for today's episode is Vanta, your security and compliance verified. And more about that later in the show. And a huge thanks to Vanta because they have been a phenomenal sponsor of the CISO series. Andy, we put this call out to the community to ask them how successful you are at getting people to agree with you on the what's worse game.
Yep.
And you believe that it's a very high percentage of people agree with you. Well, we have a fan who did just that. They actually went back through 4 years worth of our episodes, which is, I think, how long we've been doing transcripts. So you wouldn't actually have to listen to all of these to determine your success rate. A huge thanks to Derek Claver of Oxaro, I believe is how you pronounce his company's name, who has done this work. And Andy, we have the numbers now.
Excellent. I got a sneak peek at the spreadsheet, so I'm very excited.
Yes. So the numbers are that you essentially, about 3/4 of the time, people agree with you.
Yep. But I've been getting worse, I noticed.
Yes. So, Andy, you did do the stats here and noticed that in 2021, you were 3/4. 2022 jumped dramatically to about an 87% agreement. Then sliding in 2023 to about 69%. And it's looking really bad in 2024. Where you're just essentially the flip of a coin at 53%.
Basically, I need to go back and look at this year's because I went and looked at 2022 to figure out like what happened and like all the ones that were disagreeing with me. I did notice that I don't play the audience sometimes very well. There was a couple places where we had a sponsored guest and the what's worse scenario, like one of the answers was situations played to what they sold, but I went for the other one. And they're like, well, of course I can't take that. I have to go and take mine. And so I need to like think a little bit more about who I'm competing against.
That rarely, I think I can only think of one time that scenario came about.
I found, I may have been the same one I found, but I'm gonna go looking to see if I've got any more like that. But I did find we had 2 times where the guest refused to play the game.
Yeah, that's irritating, I must say.
No, well, they're both fascinating. It was Renee Gutman, who basically said, these are both awful scenarios, and the fact that we're in either one of them is my fault. So I'm just going to take the blame for having a bad security program that got us here. I thought that was a really beautiful way to answer it. And Jason Whitty, because we gave unrealistic scenarios, and he said, well, I don't live in a fantasy world, so I'm not going to play.
Bruce Schneier, his response to that has been, don't fight the hypothetical.
Yep. But we actually almost talked him around to agreeing with me, but we ran out of time and we just moved on. So
the best example of this, and I'm trying to remember, was actually the CISO of Atlassian, and I'm going to blank out on his name right now, but we were recording Atlassian with the other co-host, Mike Johnson, and Mike answered one way. The Atlassian CISO said, oh, Adrian Ludwig. He's no longer the Atlassian CISO.
Yep.
But he said something else, and Mike said, I want to change my answer, given what.
Wow.
And I said, no dice. You have to stick with what you went.
Yeah, but I did go, just so you know, the very first one he detected was when I was a guest and Mike was the host. So I did not use that in my summary.
Oh,
because the fact that there was disagreement when I went after Mike isn't really the same.
The thing is also, it's like you're the house in that you get to answer first. And if it's an easy scenario, then they'll always do it. And often we have easy scenarios, which I try not to create.
Yeah. So I think we've been getting better scenarios. So there's more disagreement.
Let's hope. By the way, call out to the audience. Send us more what's worse scenarios. Enough of this. We will have the What's Worse game later in the show. Let's bring our guest on who you work with, Andy.
I do.
This person has actually been a multi-time CISO. And like you, he is a partner over at YL Ventures. It is none other than Justin Somani. Justin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, and great to be here.
How can we secure new technology without creating new risks?
With a lot of technology, large and regulated enterprises can be slow to adapt. Think about how long the corporate mandated BlackBerry stuck in the enterprise while SMBs were quicker with BYOD. But Ross Halleluke points out that this is the opposite with cybersecurity, where large enterprises are early adopters for new startups. But solving a niche product for an enterprise may not be what the mass market needs. This leads to an adoption chasm for startups to the rest of the market. I'm going to start with you, Andy, on this. How does a startup avoid a success milestone of landing a huge enterprise customer, hampering their further growth? And by the way, I want to know if you believe that this actually happens.
Yeah, I want to challenge the premise here, which is there's a lot of technologies that first came into large enterprises and then worked down market. If you think about cell phones as an example, like they used to be a briefcase you carried around with a phone hanging out the side of it. This was not being adopted by small consumers first. And so I think what you really have to look at is what is the ICP, the ideal customer profile for a given solution coming to market. And what's really important is that a startup understands who they're trying to sell to, because what gets in their way is not, did I get a big enterprise first? It's, did my first customer not actually match my ICP? And am I now designing for the wrong market? Like if your ICP is the Fortune 500, that's great. Then you need to make sure that you don't get a design partner who's a little mom and pop shop, because they're not going to help you iterate and build a great product for your Fortune 500. Conversely, you might get one entity in the Fortune 500 that thinks you're great. They want to buy in early, and they're going to keep you busy with customized feature requests that only they need. But it turns out you're a mass market play, that you need to go to the 9,000 companies in the US that are only 1,000 employees or greater, not just that Fortune 500, but you're busy building the wrong features. So that's really what you have to look for, is that mismatch. I don't think that it is one before the other necessarily.
All right, Jess, I'm going to throw this to you. We've brought this subject up before, and the common response we hear from CISOs about working with startups is they will be very responsive to our needs and they solve some niche problem, and that's why we want to work with them. Because if they're working with a much larger level vendor, they're just not going to get that kind of service, sort of the tripping over themselves to make them happy, because they know landing this customer would be a big coup. What say you to that? And I know you have actually passionate feelings about this topic.
Yeah, I would say yes, but. And so when you look at a vendor, a startup, if you will, and its ability to land a large customer, there's could very well be, and the majority are depreciating returns on that. One, the sales cycle is so long that startup of 4 or 5 people, it takes forever in order to land them. And so what that means is they're missing other opportunities that are probably more relevant in that ICP that Andy spoke about. 2, the requirements of the demands that they are. Let's take a large bank and a financial service. The requirements of injecting into that customer is going to be so significant that is probably going to take engineering time away from those feature and functionality that they could serve in a larger base. And as a result of that, they are not going to hit their revenue mark targets and goals to get to that next funding round. And so, yes, so a large company can be massively helpful, but in a lot of cases, it can be detrimental to their performance. The trick is, do you have a customer, well, large or small, that is very aware of the development process, that it's really more of a partnership at these early stages than it is a vendor? Yes, they will be receptive to your ideas, but they've got to build a company and a wide base. And so it's a give and take.
Let me ask you about you're mentioning detrimental, because this was the premise of Ross's article about saying that there's a chasm. Do you agree that there's a chasm in that? And this goes back to what you said, Andy, of they're so tailoring for this enterpriser that they're missing the market they were originally planning? Do you agree that chasm does come along?
Absolutely. I see it a lot of times when you have a huge company, huge logo, and of course it's positive in so many ways. However, you're not going to win your entire business on one customer. You need to build a base. And so therefore you need to make sure that focus for your engineering team is building that product base for the large masses. At the same time, hopefully servicing the large companies and what they need. But sometimes, in a lot of cases, your startup is going to have to wait to maybe a couple of years down the line to be able to hit those larger companies with regulatory and larger needs.
Okay, quickly, Andy or Justin, have either of you, because you've worked with a lot of startups, ever see a startup say no to an enterprise customer? Like, we simply can't do it. We're not going to be able to deliver. It pains us to say it, but we're saying no to you. You've seen it? Yes or no?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've seen it in multiple places in the sales pipeline. I've seen people do the qualification step and just say, we're not even going to pursue this. Like, you showed up, you wanted to talk to us, and we already know we can't deal with your sales process. All the way to firing a customer because, like, you're upside down on the customer. What many startups don't get is they don't realize the volume that a large enterprise will bring to you. And they sign a deal and they're so excited. Like, this is $1 million a year deal. This is amazing. And it costs you $3 million a year to service them. And so at some point you have to fire them.
I mean, there is no better of a large company than DISA. And however, the hurdles to get DISA as a customer are pretty significant. And so that's probably not your first customer, but maybe down the line, not right now.
Let's talk community.
We hear a lot about people wanting to, quote, give back to the cybersecurity community. But what does that really mean? So that question came up on the cybersecurity subreddit recently. And the most common answer was mentorship, helping people learn and getting a foot in the door. Others pointed out things that help share knowledge, but also they raise your profile, like blogging or being active on LinkedIn. So I'm curious, Justin, where do you see the most value for yourself in giving back to the community? And here's the key thing is, what do you think we can do to incentivize more of it, more giving back in whatever way?
Yeah, I'm a big believer, especially at this later stage of life, in the giving back kind of model, where I think that comes into a couple of different components. One, how do we help the next generation of cybersecurity practitioners that are just now graduating college, supporting them, helping them with, this is what a career track could look like in a whole bunch of different variants in cybersecurity. I remember myself back in those days, there's a lot of things I didn't know, maybe even still to this day. So the ability to kind of help educate early on so that they could be better than the generation that is now. The second one is, I'm a big believer in, you don't have to look very far in order to mentor people. You can look in your own team, in your own organization. And it doesn't have to be in cyber. It can be in a lot of different things. I mean, I've been in cyber, and now Andy and I are in VC. And so how do we bring our totality of experience and probably a lot of scar tissue along the way to help those that are just learning and growing and coming into their own with this themselves? And so that is probably the two biggest things. The last one is, I'm a big believer in underrepresented individuals in cyber, in STEM as a whole, but cyber, of course, as a subcomponent of that. And how do we participate more thoughtfully in those organizations to create a healthier playing field for all of us?
All right, Andy, I throw this to you. Giving back, you create an endless amount of content. So you are, just in terms of blogging and writing, being on the show, your book, whatnot. Is there something additional you do? And again, I want to go to the incentivizing thing. Like, where is the area to incentivize? People do more of it.
I worry about the incentivization, honestly. I see a lot of people who blog to raise their profile, and they're not actually thinking about, like, is this useful content? Am I actually helping people? Because they get stuck on this wheel of, I have to keep churning out content. I write a weekly leadership newsletter, except some weeks I don't write one because I don't actually have a thing to say and I don't want to waste people's time and energy. And so we need to think about how do we be thoughtful about what we do. But I want to dig in on one of the things that Justin just said, because this is the biggest way you can benefit the rest of the community is in your own team. Like I built a security team and I've followed those people as they move out into different places in their career, and I'm watching the impact they're having. And if you want to have impact, start with the people you know. How can you help improve them? How can they see that you actually walk the walk, that you're not just, oh, I'm writing some content to go out and get engagement, but I'm actually developing the people around me so that you have built a culture of development so that people want to pay it forward. All right, let's not worry about the incentivization of paying it back. Let's worry about how do we build a culture where you say, I benefited from somebody else helping me. And so I'm going to go help other people, not because I get kudos, not because I'm going to get engagement, but because it's the right thing to do. Right? Like I sit on a number of nonprofit boards that almost nobody outside those boards even know that I do, because I'm giving back through those communities, and that because I want to help those missions, those causes. And that's what I think we need more incentive for people to do.
Before I go on any further, I do want to mention Vanta, who has been absolutely a spectacular sponsor of the CISO series, great supporter of everything that we do here. So whether you're starting or scaling your security program, Vanta helps you automate compliance across frameworks like SOC 2, ISO 27001, and more. With Vanta, you can streamline security reviews by automating questionnaires and demonstrating your security posture with a customer-facing trust center. I know you've been reading about these. They're hot. They're popular. Vanta's got one. So over 7,000 global companies like Atlassian, Flow Health, and Quora use Vanta to manage risk and prove security. So our listeners, CISO series, get $1,000 off of Vanta at vanta.com/CISO. So go to their website, vanta.com/CISO. You know how to spell that. Check them out and get your discount.
It's time to play What's Worse?
All right, it's time to play What's Worse?
Ooh.
All right, here we go. We discussed this at the beginning. No pressure to you, Justin, to disagree, but I would like it if you would disagree with whatever Andy says.
But Justin talks to me more frequently than he talks to you, David. Although Justin and I actually healthily, we often disagree reflexively just to try to find the synergistic answer.
Really? So it's conceivable that Justin will agree with you here now, and then a week later he goes, no, Andy, when we were doing the podcast recording, I have a second thought about it. I now disagree with you. Could that actually happen?
No, it's more likely to be the other way around. He'll disagree with me here, and later he'll be like, no, I think I agree with you. But often what happens, the challenge we have here is that there is no healthy compromise. We're going to get two scenarios, and we're not allowed to modify them to come up with like what's reasonable in the middle. We have to pick from these two.
Yeah, and a lot of times people say, oh, well, I'll pick that because then I will fix it by doing this. I'm like, no, there's no fixing it. It is what it is.
That's fine. This is ad hoc debate class 101. It's going to be great.
Yeah.
All right. So this comes from, and we every now and then we pick from Bad Things Daily on, it hurts me to say this, X. Not Twitter, but X.
We can call it Twitter still if we want. X is pronounced Twitter.
There you go. All right. So here are the two scenarios. A researcher poking for Log4j exposures in your product has found callbacks coming from systems you don't recognize and can't identify. Not good. Or the administrator account to your organization's cloud email is no longer accessible. The recovery email belongs to a former employee on a custom domain running on a personal email server. Which of these two is worse?
Admin one. The admin one is one I will.
I make Andy answer first.
Yeah, I'm supposed to answer first, but Justin already agrees with me, so I'm golden.
No. You disagree with me. You're just coming into realization about it.
I see. No, I was going to go with Log4j. We deal with this all the time. Like the admin one, oh, this is brutal.
Right.
No, I think the admin one is easier.
Oh, you think it's easier?
Hold on, wait, hold it. Wait, so again, the game is called What's Worse? Which scenario is worse? So you think the worst scenario is the Log4j scenario, Justin?
Correct.
All right, so we have disagreement. Excellent. All right, hold on. You're gonna flesh these out. I'm going to start with you, Andy. Andy.
So these are differently bad. Like this, which is one of the things that makes what's worse scenarios fantastic. Like what is worse for you to have to deal with as the CISO is going to be the admin situation, because you have to do really strange and arcane things to recover. So I'm going to assume your cloud provider is not going to be helpful. So you have to go hunt down this former employee, do something, deal with it. At the end of the day, like it's quiet. Nobody will ever know this happened. And so you'll have like stories over drinks forever. The flip scenario, like, oh, wait, you actually have a compromised log4j system. Well, this is SolarWinds all over again functionally, which means I've actually just talked myself into agreeing with Justin, but Justin hasn't technically answered yet, so he can change his mind.
Wait a second. No. So you're switching your answer?
Because I hadn't yet. Normally I talk myself through it. And so here's the deal. Like you're in the SolarWinds situation of your product, which assume you've hit product market fit, so is widely deployed in a lot of enterprises, turns out to now be the avenue that everybody's getting compromised. If a researcher found it, that meant they have access to your product, which means it's in enterprises, not just in your own service. So you're going to have a lot of bad days, and who knows, you might be prosecuted by the SEC on very spurious grounds going forward. So I think I kind of have to go with that one as being worse.
Okay, so you're saying the SEC, and I'm going to summarize, it's going to be longer and more painful than the first scenario. Is that, I'm getting that from
Yes.
you? Okay. All right. Justin, now that he agrees with you, because you are obviously the wiser person on the microphone right now.
He's got more gray hair than I do. Of course he's wiser.
Dare I say, he originally saw the error of his ways and then converted into greatness. And so I appreciate that about Andy. For a different tact, I believe in the goodness of human nature. And so whoever this employee is, he or she will generally do the right thing when reached out to. Our legal team will have a conversation with them and impress upon them about the needs of making sure that this account is handed back over to the rightful and just owners.
Are you going to have the legal team make the first contact? That's my question.
Oh God, not the legal team make the first call.
No, you don't make the first call. The legal team.
It's a legal issue. It's not a security issue.
Yeah, but someone who worked with this person who should make the first call.
No, it's an HR issue. Like, I'm gonna have somebody give a call and say, hey, by the way, we forgot to do this in offboarding. Can we just fix this now? And if they say no, then legal's like 5 minutes later giving them a phone call.
Yeah. Legal is not the first call.
I don't think HR should be the first call.
No, it's an HR issue, not that HR would make the call. Like I would have an executive.
I think someone who worked with this person should be the first call.
Yeah. I mean, just to be clear, I've been that employee that I have left holding like social media credentials for a company I worked with. And like, sometimes you just wait. You're like, are you ever going to realize that you don't have the credentials anymore?
Andy, are you inferring that our legal industry is full of individuals that don't have empathy or kindness or a healthy relationship with others?
I am saying that our legal industry is full of people whose fiduciary obligation is to their employer and not to humanity.
Let me ask you, have either of you either done this for a person or been the person? And my question is, was there kind of a smoothing over process like, hey, we haven't talked in a while. Let me take you out to lunch. And then over lunch.
No, very straight directive. We screwed up. When you left, we forgot to reclaim this. Somebody didn't notice. Can you help us recover it? And like, I've been on both sides of this one. Never a problem. Like I literally had this, in fact, honestly, with a social media account where literally I reached out to the person. They texted me the password. I dealt with it right there and we were fine.
Honesty and transparency is generally the best practice in these cases. Yeah. He agreed with me.
I agreed with Justin. Justin had to jump in fast to make sure I agree.
All right.
But the dynamic you just heard is actually a very common one between Justin and I, which is we dive in and we might start, but we're exploring and we're going to end up mostly in the same place. And it helps really nicely with ideation.
Mm-hmm.
So basically we're right for different reasons.
Yes.
Well, I'm going to chalk this up as someone disagreed with you at the beginning.
No. This is somebody agreed with me.
No. It's you coming around because someone else was wiser than you.
Someone else cheated and gave out his answer before I could talk myself through it.
You know, I love the spin. I love it.
Why has this topic suddenly become the center of attention?
When it comes to offensive security, are we putting the cart before the horse? We talk about wanting to build resiliency, but it often feels like we bring in things like red teaming too late in the process to have them be effective. Granted that in a greenfield deployment, you'd still need a baseline of tooling, as outlined by Danny Magallanes on LinkedIn. He names EDR, IDS, SIM, and IAM as sort of table stakes. But if we aim to do offensive security as early as possible, again, this is sort of, I know a lot of people have issue with that term, but essentially it's a form of pen testing, if you will.
Then call it pen testing. It's not offensive security. Sorry, I used to be part of an organization that did offensive security professionally. What people call offensive security today is not offensive security. I know we recently talked about stupid hills to die on. This feels like one.
I think offensive security is just pen testers without deodorant. What do you think?
Okay, that's pretty offensive, but we can take it. If you want to call yourself offensive security, that's what we're going to assume you are.
All right. All right. So, but here's my question. I'm going to start with you, actually, Justin, on this one. If we were to do, let's call it pen testing, offensive security, whatever the heck term you want to use, red teaming, whatever. If you were to do it extremely early in the build out of your security program, what could that tell you? What would be the value of doing it early? And would you recommend that?
Well, only in one situation is where you need political support. Because pen testing / red teaming, which I started in security doing exactly that many, many, many moons ago, is a mile deep and not a mile wide. And so you're not going to get a holistic view of your issues, et cetera, but you will find a bunch of good things that could be the wow factor to really be able to present in front of a CEO, a head of engineering, a head of infrastructure, whatever it is, to make them realize the possibility of bad. And so if you need that, absolutely start with it, get that wow factor to kind of loosen the chain, if you will, of support. But if not, I think there's probably bigger bang for the buck if you're starting to build out a security program.
Very, very good argument. All right. I throw this one to you, Andy. What do you think about doing pen testing, because you prefer that term, extremely early on in the security build out process?
Yeah, I think it's mostly a waste of time, except in the circumstance Justin just talked about. But if you're going to do that, like, you probably already know everything the pen testers are going to find. 80% of it, you should already know, and you should already have said, hey, these are things you should go fix, just even from lightweight analysis. Like, oh, I looked at your architectural diagram. There's a brute force attack available against passwords right here. I don't need to test it. That's the first thing my pen testers are going to go find. And so when they ignore you, you now bring in the pen testers, and they're going to basically create this list that is 80% overlap with what you already told them to go do. And your argument above that to executives is, why are we not listening to our in-house folks? Why do we have to pay money to bring in somebody from outside to embarrass us when we already knew better?
Oh, but that happens a lot with all consulting.
Oh, absolutely. As somebody who does consulting on the side, I will tell you, I get paid to be the outside voice telling you what your insider already knew. But I want it to not be about trivial things. And often we use pen testers to tell us about trivial things. The most important thing you should do if you engage in a pen tester is, when you constrain them, which you will do, everybody does. They say, you can't attack this, you can't attack that, whatever it's going to be. Oh, you just got credentials here. Well, you're not allowed to do this other thing next. That list of constraints is something you should publish when you bring your pen test report to whomever it's going for. You should say, and by the way, here is how badly we had to hobble the pen testers to make this report only this small.
Let me throw out this argument, and I don't know if this is valid or not, but I'm throwing this out because I'm just arguing for the side of, yeah, this would be a good idea. Is there anything that a pen tester could tell you early on that would open your eyes to any architectural design that I'm like, oh, if we do this early on, that if you didn't deal with it early on, you see it later, then it becomes sort of painful and costly? Or that doesn't exist?
Almost never, because early on there's going to be so many problems that an architectural flaw isn't going to show up necessarily as this fundamental issue. Like that's when you get a pen tester who's like, oh, I've got to go work for it. I'm able to look at the system diagrams. Like if your pen tester can work without system diagrams, they're unlikely to find serious architectural defects.
I think you've got a different problem if you're including it as part of the SDLC or the release train or whatever kind of process of deployment that you're talking about, development and release. You don't have enough people to keep up with the releases that a company has. And so how are you going to have a heavily labor-oriented process maintain the release train cycle, speed and velocity that a company has nowadays? I mean, we're talking about release trains that are happening 15 times a day for SaaS services. And so it just doesn't scale. And so you need to be thoughtful about where you put red teaming. I think it can add value. And I agree with Andy's point. I think it can add value, but it's a scalpel of a tool, not a general purpose one that we generally need for most things.
Is AI going to help us or hurt us?
So I don't know what phase of the Gen AI hype cycle we're in currently. I've actually lost track. But one thing this new tech wave is making very obvious is that companies can struggle to balance embracing innovation with privacy considerations. Christopher Burgess at CSO Online outlined this as a compromise from embracing the Gen AI tech, like having AI chatbots in Zoom meetings versus privacy concerns that could either skirt regulations or just rub employees the wrong way. So I'll start with you, Andy, on this. How do we create a framework for this compromise? Does it exist? Where we're not missing out on technical innovation without giving up on privacy. And that seems like kind of the big one right here. But if you can point out any others if you'd like.
What's fascinating here is the tech that's problematic was not Gen AI. It was recording the Zoom meeting.
Right.
What Gen AI did was made that useful. We've always had the ability to record Zoom meetings, at least for a very long time. But what did people do? Like you had this recording that was mostly useless. And occasionally you'd we recorded our training so that Justin, who didn't show up, can listen to the training later, which Justin was like, yeah, you think I'm going to listen to the training? No, I'm not really going to do so. But now we have a chat bot that will listen to the training for Justin and give him the summary that says, yeah, Andy pontificated for 60 minutes. He said one useful thing. Here's what it is. Now go on with the rest of your day. The problem here is that the AI made it useful to record, not that AI recorded. And I think we should separate these concepts to say, if we're going to record a thing, that's where the privacy consideration came in. The consideration did not come in because we let an AI chatbot interact with it.
I'm going to argue with you a little on this. You are technically right. And if we were in front of a judge, yes, but the usefulness now makes it a privacy concern, in that now my privacy is far more easily exposed than it was before.
Right. So we've changed the incentives, and that's going to be what's important. But I think the challenge is nobody sits and talks about privacy from a first principle and says, how should we think about privacy in our business? Should we record our meetings? Should we take notes in our meetings? What should we do? Because if you had ever had that conversation, then people wouldn't just turn on a chatbot willy-nilly, because they'd say, oh, I know that in a one-on-one, we do not record one-on-ones, period, ever. Because that's a corporate rule. And so the idea that a chatbot's going to record what I say to Justin, and then that's available to somebody else would never happen. Because that's my issue, is not the chatbot making it available to the people in the meeting. It's a persistent recording available to everybody else. Like the transcripts for this show. We know it's going to be transcribed. We're intentionally recording this. But I don't want the transcripts of every call I've ever had published.
Mm-hmm. Good point. All right. Andy makes a good point. Do you have another point to make, or you want to double down on what Andy said?
Well, I think it's a little bit more nuanced, because the question is AI going to help or hurt us? There's a lot of different modules or algorithms in AI. And I think we're hyperinflating nowadays that Gen AI is AI, and that's just not really true. I think, and I also agree with Andy, that it is a privacy issue. However, with AI, and that analysis, it's not the transcribing I see as the issue. It's how can I attach the information of that transcription, for example, into a larger data set to make inferences or insightfulness that I otherwise would not be able to do. So, for example, when I was at Yahoo, we had AI ethics on search around the information you could identify about a persona based upon their browsing habits and everything else. And I think there's a notorious article about somebody saying, hey, I was informed that I was pregnant by a chat or something like
it's an apocryphal story. I know where it comes from.
Yeah. And so whether that's real or not, the situation, I think, is really the point. And that is really the concern that I think we should be thinking about, which is how can we make inferences or actual factual inferences that might be a little bit creepy and that we might not want to do. So it's the ethics around it. The second point that I would make is I think that the helping or hurting us around Gen AI, right now we're in kind of a hype cycle of the use cases of Gen AI. And so I don't think it's going to have as much of a panacea of intelligence to everything that people might otherwise think. But there are some really good use cases for it. But I think that it's going to be tempered with reality in the next couple of years. But having said that, it is exciting for an algorithm, but I think we should take a step back and look at a lot of the other algorithms that are massively valuable as well.
Well, excellent, both of you gentlemen. That topic alone could be an entire episode or it could be a whole podcast series on its own. But we're going to leave that discussion right there. I want to thank you, Justin, for coming on. I'm going to let you have the very last word here. But first, I do want to thank our sponsor, Vanta. Vanta.com. Get $1,000 off on your Vanta service for all your compliance needs. Vanta.com/CISO. Go check them out. Andy, as always, thank you so much. Justin, any last words? Any interesting things you're working on you want to tell us? I'm assuming for both you, Wild Ventures, your Wild Ventures companies are hiring. Yes, the portfolio companies. Just go to your site if someone's looking for a job.
Well, I'm sure they are hiring and there's key roles, but I think they're more focused on how they do outreach to potential individuals that might actually see their solutions adding value into their companies. And to that point, maybe a little bit of a segue to any security leader out there that is really interested in our portfolio companies or just the innovation that we see in the market as a whole. My ask is reach out to me, send me a LinkedIn request, send me an email. By all means, we'd love to have that conversation with you.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Justin. Thank you very much, Andy. And thank you to our audience. We greatly appreciate your contributions. More what's worse scenarios, please. Send them in. Really tough ones for Andy. They don't also, by the way, when you send them in, they don't have to be the flip side of the same problem. They get one scenario and then one completely different scenario, like what we sort of threw out today. Send those in. We greatly appreciate it. And we'll give you full credit. You don't have to. Sometimes people like to be anonymous. That happens every now and then because they just don't want to be associated with our program. I think it's a problem.
I don't know why somebody wouldn't want to be associated with our program.
I don't think that, honestly, I think some people feel that they're going to get repercussions at their job.
Because some companies do actually very much care about how their name ever gets used in public.
I know. We have seen this problem before. Thank you, everybody, for your contributions and for listening to the CISO Series podcast.
That wraps up another episode. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast, please do. We have lots more shows on our website, CISOseries.com. Please join us on Fridays for our live shows, Super Cyber Friday, our virtual meetup, and Cybersecurity Headlines Week in Review. This show thrives on your input. Go to the Participate menu on our site for plenty of ways to get involved, including recording a question or a comment for the show. If you're interested in sponsoring the podcast, contact David Spark directly at david@cisoseries.com. Thank you for listening to the CISO Series podcast.